Good morning, Israel, and good afternoon, India. A warm welcome to Professor Efraim Inbar and the team JISS on this joint CAPS-JISS webinar. This is our second webinar, but we have also had the privilege of having the professor in New Delhi for a talk in CAPS. Today we are discussing air power in Syria and Himalayas, and for long it has been clear that the one who controls air and space controls this planet. Air power has played a very significant and dominant role in all the major wars since World War II. Air power consists of application of military aviation, both for strategic and tactical effects. The line dividing air and space has begun to shrink. More and more crafts are now transiting between the Earth atmosphere and space in the same mission. These numbers are going to increase in times to come. Also, the sensors in space are greatly supporting all the warfare on Earth. More countries have started merging the two domains under single organization. A level of aerospace superiority is required for the surface campaign to succeed. Aerospace has been leading in technologies and also sees early obsolescence. Artificial intelligence, AI, has been supporting greater autonomy, and more roles are being taken over by unmanned platforms, and manned-unmanned teaming has greatly started unfolding its potential. Many wars in the recent past have been in uncontested domain, and my caution is that we should not derive incorrect lessons from them. In the ongoing Ukraine war, despite serious numerical asymmetry, air superiority in conventional sense could not be established. It has been more a case of air denial. All battle space has got highly networked, and platforms' strength flows from the advanced sensors. Therefore, electronic warfare and cyber warfare have great importance. Instances of close combat are reducing. Future engagements will be at much longer ranges. See first, shoot first, hit first will remain the target in an intense electronic countermeasures environment. Long-range precision strike and global mobility will be the hallmarks of all modern future air forces. We in India have the fourth largest air force, but it is still significantly dependent on imported hardware. India has become conscious that mass technology base is necessary for the development of air power, and we are working aggressively towards indigenization. On the other side, Israel has had a great action in 1967 and 1973 wars, which we have, and of course in 1982, we have all been studying in military academies. They continue to use air power in their neighborhood all the time in that no war, no peace scenario that Israel faces. For us in India, the battleground is in the world's highest mountain ranges, the Himalayas. The use of air power in high altitude has its own dynamics and complexity, and that is why we have chosen these two subjects today. We'll be happy first to listen to how air power is being deployed in Syria. With these few words of welcome, I now request Dr. Retd. Eran Lerman to take us through the Israel's campaigns between wars in Syria, utilizing air power based on accurate intelligence. Over to you, Colonel Lerman. Yes.
Air Marshal, my
Just a moment, Eran, just a moment.
Yes.
I just want to introduce Air Marshal Anil Chopra to our Israeli audience. Air Marshal Anil Chopra was a fighter pilot, a test pilot, a pioneer of the Mirage 2000 fleet. He commanded the Mirage 2000 squadron and aircraft and systems testing establishment. He was a team leader of the MiG-21 Bison upgrade project in Russia. He has commanded 2 operational flying air bases. He was the head of the Indian Air Force, the YAF, exactly the same acronym as Israel's Air Force. And he was the commander in Jammu and Kashmir and head of operational inspections of the YAF. Retired as air officer personnel, he has been a member of the Armed Forces Tribunal and a member of the Executive Council of the JNU University. He is an avid writer who has more than 750 published articles. He has authored 3 books and edited 5. Air Marshal runs Air Power Asia, a website that puts Asia's aviation and military power into a correct perspective. And he is currently Director General of the Center for Air Power Studies, CAPS, who co-organizes this seminar. And I'm very proud of this relationship. Eran?
Okay, let me plunge directly into my subject.
I will just introduce Colonel Eran for our audience.
All right, very quickly.
Colonel Eran is Vice President at the GISS and teaches at Shalom College. He was Deputy Director for Foreign Policy and International Affairs at National Security Council in Israeli Prime Minister office in years 2009 to 2015. He held senior posts in IDF for over 20 years. He has also served for 8 years as Director of the Israel and Middle East Office of the American Jewish Committee. He holds a PhD from London School of Economics and a mid-career MPA from Harvard University. Now I invite Colonel Eran to give his talk, please.
Thank you, Avin. First of all, I should make a careful confession. I'm not an Air Force guy. That's my brother, who has been an Air Force planner for many years. I come from the intelligence side, and this is very much a story, by the way, of the very close coordination of actionable intelligence and air power. And as usual, in such stories, this is a series of events in which action came first, a pattern of action emerged, and then it was formulated into theory in 2 interesting stages. And I want to refer both to the practice and the theory as they emerged. Israel has been acting way beyond its borders by air and combined air and commando operations for many years. This is not something that has emerged in the Syrian context. I would walk you back to the Entebbe liberation of hostages in '76, to, of course, the famous Begin Doctrine air raids on nuclear facilities in 1981 in Iraq and 2007 in Syria, to operations at sea, basically taking over supply ships of terrorists, which could not take place without the long air arm enabling the naval commandos to operate in 2002 and other events later. And I should also mention that, for example, watching current events in Khartoum reminded all of us that in 2012, a major attack on a depot in Khartoum played a role in persuading the regime there at the time to switch sides from the Iranians to the Saudis. I assume there was also some Saudi compensation. The Saudis are good at that. But at the time, by the way, and Israel had a policy at the time, and still has a policy now, of not disclosing specific actions. 2007 was nominally kept secret, although the American leaked all over the place, for 11 years. The Khartoum raid, we never admitted to. At the time, I was at National Security Council, and the ambassador of a friendly country who just came to Israel over from Khartoum came to me and said, "What was that?" I said, "I have no idea. I'm in no position to confirm or deny, but if the Sudanese think we did it, maybe they have a construct in their mind as to why would we want to do that, and therefore they should cease and desist, whatever it is that they're doing that may give us cause to do that." And it was a very similar story, by the way, a kind of antecedent to our present situation in Syria. because what we were doing was to disrupt the Iranian supply line. At the time, it was going to Sudan through smugglers and secret routes through Egypt, which was in a semi-chaotic situation, over into Sinai and through the supply tunnels that have since been destroyed into Gaza. So the pattern of using long-range Air Force operations to disrupt supply line of terror, I assume this is also quite relevant to your situation in Kashmir and Jammu, has already been there before we actually launched a more systemic and persistent and extensive campaign in Syria. By 2013, we were already doing this also in Syria, more or less on occasion, not yet as let's say, weekly or even sometimes nearly daily practice. There was an attack on a convoy carrying supplies to Hezbollah in 2013, and a few more followed, and it was becoming a regular activity. Almost never admitted to. Although when the Iranians, in retaliation, did fire at our positions in the Golan Heights, a very ineffectual attack, by the way, although they bragged that they killed dozens of Israelis, none was hurt. But Israel retaliated openly and in a declared manner, destroying dozens of Iranian positions across Syria by Air Force. That was a disproportionate, retaliatory act of deterrence, and it has largely achieved its goal. And the Iranians became much more wary of having a high profile of their own in Syria. Much of their action today there is carried on the shoulders of militias from Iraq or even further afield from among the Shia of Afghanistan, operating under the aegis and coordination of the IRGC command, this gentleman Kaini, who took over from Soleimani when the latter was eliminated by American action. But basically, they've learned over time to take caution. Whether we have completely succeeded in destroying their ambitions in Syria is a debatable proposition. My good friend Ehud Yaari, my good friend Ehud Yaari recently published an essay in a magazine, which I happen to edit, in which he said basically we failed. And I believe this is too harsh a judgment. The Iranians are there, definitely. Their militias are there, but they're acting with extreme caution, and our hammer blows continue to fall on them. And I wouldn't prejudge the outcome of this campaign. It's true, we did not altogether persuade them to turn tail, and we certainly did not bring about, and we did not want to bring about, the collapse of the Syrian regime, of the Assad regime. Now, to go into the pattern as it emerges from 2015 onwards, I should say two interesting things happened. First of all, it became even before that, it was becoming a regular activity of the IDF, of the AF, raiding specific targets based on pinpoint intelligence. Just recently, our outgoing chief of staff of the IDF, Lieutenant General Kochavi, spoke of truck number 8 being struck in a convoy of 25 trucks crossing from the Iraqi border over into Syria. So you can get a sense of just the level of actionable intelligence involved, because the others were sort of innocent. That one was the one carrying warheads for Hezbollah rockets. So this is dependable let's say, in total synergy with our intelligence capacities and driven day in and day out by specific intelligence, which is collected in a whole range of ways, as you can assume. I don't think we would have been where we are had we not made a decision about 20 years ago to go, a small country, at the time a lot of people raised their eyebrows, to go into space and have a permanent visual intelligence capacity covering not only Syria, but Iraq and Iran on a 24/7 basis. So, but add to this, of course, our prowess, I would say that, in signal intelligence and our command of cyberspace. And so we know what's coming in, we know where it's coming in. It's we don't even have to make the pretensions that the British did when they bombed the convoys to Mutorommel in the Mediterranean, that they've discovered it by accidentally. Of course, they knew everything from reading Enigma. We act on intelligence, we don't pretend otherwise. The important events in 2015 were, first of all, the Russian entry into Syria. And here we are in a delicate situation in which, while we share certain sentiments about Russian conduct in world affairs, we are obliged to remain very cordial in our relations with the Russians in Syria. And back then, in September 15, almost immediately after the Russians made this fateful decision to save Assad's regime from disintegration, I remember they pulled me aside at the National Security Conference in Ulan-Ude in Siberia and told me, you have to go and tell your friends, the Saudis, as if, you know, we were such friends, to stop supporting chaos in Syria. And they came in with their air force, and Netanyahu went to Sochi to see Putin. And the result, which holds to this day, was a deconfliction mechanism involving a point-to-point communication, a kind of red line, from IAF headquarters in Tel Aviv and the Russian command, Air Force command position in Khmeinim in Syria. We have no difficulty finding Russian speakers on our side. And I assume they have no problem on their side. So we talk and we avoid conflicts, almost entirely successfully. There was one funny, almost funny episode. I mean, funny, people died. But there was an episode in which the Syrian air defenses shot down a misidentified Russian intelligence aircraft, an Ilyushin 12. And the Russians accused us of hiding behind, our F-16s of hiding behind their Ilyushin, as if, you know, a hare can hide behind a tortoise. It was basically just looking for an excuse to cover for the shameful situation in which their people were killed in arms that they supplied to the Syrians. But basically, other than that episode, which was settled when our Chief of Air Force went to Moscow and gave explanation, basically, this has been working ever since. The second interesting development was the beginning of the emergence of a theoretical framework for this kind of warfare. Chief of Staff at the time, Lieutenant General Gadi Eisenkot, published for the first time a document called Israeli IDF Doctrine. And there he actually introduced an innovation, let's say, in the classification of what we're doing. There is peacetime, there's wartime, and in between there are emergencies which require certain kinds of actions on a regular basis. And this is the beginning of what later came to be called, also in his time, the campaign between the wars, by Hebrew initials Mabam Ma'aracha Ben HaMilchamot. The assumption is that the next war is coming sooner or later. And in between wars, our mission is to degrade and deter by regular action, particularly designed to prevent two things. One is the creation of an Iranian-controlled array of forces and capabilities in Syria itself, which would join a war against Israel if we come to a conflict with Iran. The second element is to deny as much as possible the transfer of, let's say, groundbreaking items, those who would change the strategic balance, to Hezbollah, particularly the capacity to make their massive missile array more accurate into sort of precision-guided munitions. And that campaign has been going on, again, almost night in and night out, with actionable intelligence leading to specific airstrikes of all kinds. They can come from long-range platform, long-range attacks. They can come by air raids into Syria over time. And they're also directed at certain elements of the Syrian military establishment, particularly those concerned with the development of weapons of mass destruction and precision munitions. I would say that in addition to the enabling diplomatic dimension, our relationship with the Russians, there are two other clearly relevant enablers. One, as I said already, is intelligence dominance, without which none of this could have been relevant. And the second is, and General Marshal, I'm grateful for you for mentioning it, the Syrians' own realization that the Israeli Air Force is not to be trifled with. Not so much because of 73 or 67, but because of their utter humiliation and destruction in Operation Mole Cricket 19, which is, I think, a textbook operation in 1982. Parts of our war in Lebanon there we are less proud of, but this one was a brilliant restoration of the honor of our Air Force, which was to some extent tarnished by operational mistakes in 73. And the Syrians, remember, they lost 100-1 in the air, and their pride of Soviet air defense systems at the time was demolished entirely, the SA-6 systems at the time. So the Syrians are very wary of coming to any such test again. And I have the pattern of their reactions after every raid is, well, the Israelis have struck us again. We shall take it out on those bloody rebels who are working with the Zionists inside Syria. And we also shot down a lot of the incoming missiles, as if, you know, their readers are not supposed to know that a lot of decoys come in with every PGM. So that kind of reaction basically is a cop-out of another way of saying we're not going to do anything about it. We know better than that. So this is the ongoing situation. I would say that our capacities have been greatly enhanced in the last few years with the integration of the F-35s into our Air Force. I think the 39th F-35 has just arrived, and the numbers would grow to 75. These are not just platforms for in themselves, they are coordinating platforms for others. And as you said rightly, Marshal, all of this depends increasingly on the coordination of everything that is in the air at any given time, and including drones of various capacities, of course, playing an increasing role also in intelligence collection, as well as manned platforms, which for various reasons we still see as utterly vital to the kind of campaign we are conducting. And at this point, if there's questions, I hope I didn't go over too much over my time.
Oh, thank you very much, Eran. The first question will be by Air Marshal Anil Chopra. Please ask your question.
Yeah. So, you know, two very, very brief questions. One is about actionable intelligence. You talked about cyber, signal, and various other types of photo, other intelligence. Do you think that human intelligence, in your case, because of the environment that you people are in, especially if you have to find out the 8th truck in a 42-truck convoy, is human intelligence important? And my second brief question is that since Iran seems to be, from your talk and from whatever we have been hearing in the past, is critical for you people in Israel, the China brokered Iran-Saudi deal and the dynamics of Russia and US in Ukraine. How do you see this Iran-Saudi deal impacting, Israel? Yeah.
Two tough questions. First of all, human intelligence is very important, is vital to understand the general framing. What are Hezbollah purposes? What is Iran planning to do? What is the overall concept with which we are dealing? But as Clausewitz could have already told you, the timelines of human intelligence, except for very rare situations where you have a reporting agent in the convoy, the timelines for intelligence, for closing the sensor to shooter cycle are such that you must rely largely on signal and visual intelligence to actually finish the job. But I'm not underestimating the importance of human intelligence if you place it rightly in the scheme of things. This is where you seek to understand what is the conceptual framework which you're dealing with. What are the purposes of the Iranians? On the Saudi and the Iranian situation, I think that was a way by MBS to actually stick a heavy elbow in Biden's chest. But in addition, I would say, and there is a specific issue which I actually understand, that the Saudis and the Iranians need to find a way to talk about, which is the mess in Yemen, which is going nowhere for either side. It's a human catastrophe that needs to come to an end one way or the other. And so the Chinese moved in and made a show of doing this in Chinese, no English spoken, and and all that she paraphernalia of power. But at the end of the day, I don't think it removes the Saudi sense that Iranian ambitions and Saudi purposes are at crossed swords. And I actually connect this with my subject. I would say that in addition to the operational benefits that we draw from the CBW, the Campaign Between the Wars, it has also been very important for us as proof to our new friends in the Arab world, our mutual I2U2 partners in the Emirates, Israel, India, US, UAE, and the Saudis. My old saying that what is the most crowded place in the Middle East? It's under the table, where we sit with the Saudis and others on a regular basis. And the fact that we are not just talking, I mean, we have some fine talkers, God knows, Prime Minister first of many, but we are not only talking, we are acting on a daily basis, or 3 times a week, whatever, hitting the Iranians, curtailing their capacity. And this, I think, has made us much more, let's say, inviting proposition for our new partners in the region.
Arvind?
Any other? Are we taking questions also from listeners?
Audience, if you have any questions now.
No, if not, right.
There is somebody on chat function.
Mahir Duga, thank you very much. What lessons do you think India can learn from Israel's cyber capabilities? I should have mentioned cyber. Frankly, it's an excellent question. I should have mentioned cyber on my list of enablers. Rumor has it that one of the first usages of cyber in war, which I'm not in the position, as they say in Israel, to confirm or deny, but in anger, as they say, not war, but in between wars, but it was in 2007 when the Syrians, for mysterious reasons, did not know that we are in. And cyber is increasingly part and parcel of our capacity to disable Syrian air defenses, to prevent Iranian interference, to track and destroy incoming Iranian drone operations that are trying to they're occasionally trying to launch in retaliation. They're trying, by the way, to establish a kind of drone route over Jordan and into the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, as we say, and so far have failed. But it's an interesting attempt because they need to destabilize Jordan in order to get actual access to Nablus and Hebron and the areas that are directly in conflict with Israel. And we are using cyber capacities and combined, and increasingly, by the way, we are bringing in artificial intelligence for the analysis of targeting and closing the cycle of shooter, sensor to shooter more quickly. And all of this is becoming part of our operational doctrine.
Okay, Arvind, we start the second part of our webinar.
By all means.
Yes, sir. Now I'll invite Marshal Chopra to give his lecture.
Okay, I am going to share my content. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yes, I'm going to make a short presentation on the air power in mountains and the challenges and how do you respond to it, mainly because that's where the action has been in India and that's where the action will be in India for us. So you all know where we are. Great Himalayas, still young, growing. They're only about 1 million years old, and every year the Himalayas are going up by an inch or so. And I've just shown you the pictures to give you an idea of the altitudes at which the Indian military, the Army, Air Force are. Indian Air Force was formed in 1932, and from early days we have been in action. In 1930s, during the British time, we saw action in the northwest frontier, the portion that is marked in red against the Pashtuns and the Afghans. In 1942, the Americans during Second World War to support China across Himalayas, they ran a logistic air chain called the Hump, and they flew, thousands and thousands of tons. And they created new air bases, which are being used subsequently by India. And the Indian Air Force learned a lot on how the Americans are doing the operations. And then, of course, in the Burma campaign, Second World War, Indian Air Force was directly involved. It involved the mountains and jungles. We have in India inherited some boundary issues, which are known to you all, especially in Jammu and Kashmir, and also there are Chinese claims in Arunachal in the east, and of course in Kashmir, the claims of Pakistan. So therefore, this is where a large amount of action has taken place in the wars. And I want to give you an overview of what was the state in 1947 when we got independence. There were these two bigger towns, Srinagar and Jammu, which I'm just indicating with an arrow. They had, mud strips, airstrips, small ones. All the other towns, Poonch, Kargil, Leh, they did not have any airstrips at all. The other important points, which I'll be subsequently talking about, is Siachen Glacier, which is at altitude of 5,400 meters. Then this is the Pengkong Lake, where we had the recent Galwan, showdown with the skirmish with the Chinese. And DBO is the point near Karakoram Pass, where the Chinese, the Pakistanis and Indians, we're not too far from each other. Some of these things I will be mentioning as we go along. I want to mention that we have had an exposure. We have had 4 major wars with Pakistan. We've had 1 full-scale war with China. Of course, we have had skirmishes with both of them repeatedly. And mostly the wars have been in the mountains. Of course, some of the wars were covering the entire country. At the time of independence, India had 7 Dakotas, light transport aircraft and 4 squadrons of fighters. And on 26th October, when the Maharaja of J&K acceded to India, very next morning, 3 Dakotas took off from Delhi to Srinagar, set up an air bridge, and finally a full regiment of Indian troops had to be sent because the Pakistani intruders had come very close to the capital of Kashmir, that is Srinagar. And finally, the Indian army, of course, Indian fighters also did operations there. That time, the fighters were these propeller Tempest, Spitfire, Howards. And that is how we started our learning the game of fighting in the mountains the hard way. Finally, within about 3 months, 1 airstrip was built at Poonch, and another 6 months later, 1 at Leh, and formal air bridges were set up to these places. We recovered a large amount of territory which the intruders had taken over. But because of political reasons, pressures from the world, India decided to stop the military operations. And I personally feel that if we had continued, we would have regained most of the Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. Then, of course, the China war happened. And I want to highlight that, the Indian Air Force by this time had the latest Western, not the latest, much better fighter aircraft from the West. We had the Canberra bombers, we had some transport aircraft, and compared to the Chinese, we were much better off, I thought, from the Indian Air Force point of view. But for some reasons, Americans were going through the Cuba crisis. Our political leadership that time was a little soft, and the Americans put pressures not to use the air power so that the war doesn't escalate, and Indian leadership overestimated the reactions of the Chinese. Finally, we did some air operations across to Tibet, fighter and Canberra recce's, but the fighters were not used for close air support. Mostly transport helicopters were used. In fact, the transport aircraft of Indian Air Force took 2 troops of tanks to Ladakh, and interestingly, the Himalayan plateaus in Ladakh and Sikkim have tank battlegrounds. Then came the 1965 war. It was a full front war between India and Pakistan. Of course, it all started with the intention of Pakistan wanting to take over Kashmir. But the point I want to highlight is that on some counts, the war was a stalemate in the sense that, but India did gain territory both in Kashmir as well as in the plains of Punjab. We flew much larger number of sorties. Of course, we were a larger air force. We lost similar number of aircraft both sides, but because of the size, the percentage loss for Indian Air Force was much lesser. And but at the end of it, crucial territory gains, Kashmir and Punjab, finally had to be given back because the Soviet supported Tashkent agreement wanted us to go back to our old original positions. All this, why I'm telling you, is that we were gaining experience in mountain warfare. In 1971 was an all-out Indo-Pakistan war where we liberated Bangladesh. But there was significant action in the mountains. We carried out repeat strikes in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, including Skadu. Skadu is the picture that you see on the right. Of course, this is the current state. Now they got 2 runways. At that time, there used to be only 1, and we bombed that on the last stages of the war. There were serious air battles to defend the valleys, the 2 airfields, Srinagar and Avantipur in Kashmir Valley, and of course, the logistic support to Indian Army all across Jammu and Kashmir. Thereafter, we had the first major mountain war that was in 1999. It was a localized war in Kargil. There were restrictions. The Indian government had said that Indian Air Force cannot cross the line of control, and therefore the whole war had to be fought over the Indian positions that had been taken over by the intruders, Pakistani intruders. So what did we learn? We, of course, did air recce's, air strikes, logistics support. Sorties, there were no aerial engagements, but we had to launch air defense CAPS. Man pads on top of the hills on the valley slopes proved very effective. In fact, India lost 2 aircraft in the early stages of the war. One because he did not carry flares and the missiles came and hit. Another aircraft we lost because we had never fired rockets at an altitude of 6 kilometers. And when you fire a rocket in a fighter aircraft, the air gets disturbed in the intake, and we lost the aircraft, single engine aircraft lost an engine, and thereafter so we did learn the hard way. But both laser bombs and free fall bombs were effectively used. Bunkers, individual bunkers on top of the hill at altitude of nearly 5,000 meters were taken out. The logistic nodes were targeted. Air power greatly reduced the time of recovering our post packs, and the army casualties greatly reduced. So we had in 2022 the Galwan incidents, where the air forces were not directly involved. India lost about 20 soldiers in that skirmish. Some similar numbers of the Chinese people also died. The exact numbers, of course, don't come from the other side because they're a closed society. But India activated all its airfields and advanced landing grounds. The Air Force supported Indian Army in massive build-up effort, including airlifting of tanks. They were thereafter, ever since this incident, we have had full-time fighter presence in the, in the Ladakh area, where we have 2 full airfields which can take on fighters. Of course, the airfields in the Kashmir Valley have always had fighters. Now, let me tell you from our experience in the mountains, what are the peculiarities of, mountain flying. Of course, at these altitudes, anything above 10,000 feet, oxygen is low, it's bad for humans. You have to acclimatize the systems. The very cold winter, the temperature is -40, -45. You require hangar heating, your fuel, oil, lubricants have issues of cold. Aircraft and vehicle engine start issues, fuel air mixtures have to be reset. Hot and high issues in summers. The aircraft performance goes, the long takeoff run, the reduced weight carriage capabilities, etc. But I must tell you, all Indian Air Force fighters and transport aircraft fit enough to fly at altitudes, airfields at altitude of 10,000 and above. That's a criteria for us to buy aeroplanes. Weapon firing, there are limitations because of airflow disturbances. There are issues about laser lasing on targets in the valleys. There's short contact with the target, especially if you're doing valley flying, the dive directions and angle issues. And there are valley flying dynamics, there are dead valleys, there are wind issues, there are downdrafts, suddenly appearances of clouds. So these are the kind of challenges that you have in, when you handle mountain warfare, air warfare. Now there are, I must mention that for the last 70 years, the Indian Army has been sitting on the Himalayas, all across the Himalayas, in large numbers, fairly large numbers. Of course, after the Galwan, the numbers have increased. The Indian Air Force flies close to 30,000 tons by air, in addition to what is taken by road and other means. In the Indian Army, for Siachen and in the northeast, the Himalayas have many, many advanced landing grounds and helipads. They have been active, as I said, for 70 years, and they're being upgraded. Of course, the Indian Air Force has to do a large number of communication, flights, move personnel and field commanders. We have to support the civil sector. The fighter training has to go on through the year in valleys. High altitude weaponry has to be done. And of course, these borders required ISR, photo recce, ELINT missions through satellites and UAVs and fighter aircraft. And we have to secure the Siachen Glacier, the glacier which, as I said, the highest, fighting ground in the world today. So therefore, there is action round the clock, irrespective of war or peace. I want to show you these 2 pictures. C-130 landing at DPO at a height of 5,100 meters. Of course, there are other aircraft, transport aircraft of Indian Air Force, which have first landed in the 1960s at this high ground using special engines. And on the right is the mountain peak on which the Indian ALH helicopter did a test landing at this altitude. Of course, for that, they had to remove some parts of the aircraft to make it lighter. Now, mention, for us now, the bigger threat is from the Chinese side. Their air war strategy is to importance of aerospace power in mountains is very well understood. They're going to build air power for asymmetric advantage, move forward edge of the battle into the enemy territory. That's their stated doctrine. Strike major frontline Indian Air Force bases, quick critical boundary gains they would like to have, especially try to gain high ground, which we saw during the Galwan crisis, but India did the similar actions. They have preference for air and surface long missiles and standoff PGMs. They would not send aeroplanes like the Russians are not doing in Ukraine. Extensive use of cyber electronic warfare, information warfare, and net-centric ops. Of course, this is something that each Air Force of the world. I just want to show the latest SIPRI report 2022 of what is the strengths. Some of these figures may be sort of contested, but doesn't matter. Let's all go by what SIPRI says. Certainly, the Chinese Air Force is larger in some cases. They're about 2.5 times in many cases, except that in attack helicopters, they are much more numbers they have got, and they're surely there is more need to be done. They are a country of 2.5 times. Their defense budget is 2.5 times, and they have got 2.5 times the threat because their main challenge is in the Indo-Pacific side with the Americans. Now, I want to highlight in this map, you see the great airfield advantage that India has. Most of the Chinese airfields, which are about 11 of them as of today, are at very high altitudes, and see the number. We've got about 25, 30, or 20, maybe more airfields on Indian side at a much lower altitude of as little as 700 to 800 meters, and their airfields that are much higher altitude, mostly around 3 kilometers or so. Clearly, PLAF is modernizing, growing overall numbers. Indian Air Force has the advantage of airfield numbers. Indian Air Force will be able to launch a larger number of missions in the mountains compared to the Chinese. India has a large number of advanced landing grounds. They are active all the time. We have hardened aircraft shelters mostly in place. China has stretched logistics, rail and road lines have been built, pipelines have been built, but still a move of an additional division could take a long time. The PLA Air Force has begun regular exercises in Tibet in the last 2-3 years, and this frequency is increasing. But Indian Air Force transport and helicopter have been operating in this region for the last 70 years. The IF crew have war experience. We have fought so many wars. I think after Korea, the PLA has not fought a war, barring short wars in Vietnam and little skirmish with the Russians. And Indian Air Force has higher exposure to international exercises. We are doing about exercises with 10 to 12 countries every year. So we are exercising with every Western country, and of course also the Russians. I want to mention that in the Himalayas, we have a lot of issues that we need to support the civilian government on humanitarian aid and disaster relief. We had earthquake in Kashmir in 2007, in Nepal in 2015. In Nepal, we flew close to 2,300 sorties. The Uttarakhand flash floods, again, we flew 2,500 sorties. Every year, there are mountaineers and skiers we have to retrieve in emergencies. We have snow tsunami where the Kashmir Valley roads get cut off, and we have to fly, build an air bridge to support them. And of course, we are supporting every department in the civil power line restoration, bridge building, and everything in the mountains by air. Now, just to summarize what the state of affairs in mountain flying is. Yes, mountain flying and attack angles are issues, directions are peculiar. You can get into a valley only in a particular direction. The air and satellite recce ops are very, very important. The ground movements are extremely so. There are tank battlegrounds clearly earmarked and known. Both sides have positioned their tanks there. Luckily, the tanks have not had a face-off yet. The PLA Air Force certainly has the disadvantage of airfields. If India was to neutralize 2 or 3 of their airfields, I'll make a huge dent to their side. Knocking off roads and bridges is important. The repair cycles in the mountains very long. I mean, if the repair cycle in the plains is 1 year, the repair cycle in the mountains is 4 years. That's the kind of, so interdiction is going to play important role. Few lines of communications are there, and therefore dividend is going to be extremely high. The Indian Air Force has to all the time support for inter and intra-theater movement of ground forces, and also inter-valley movement of materials. With these few words, I have broadly covered what is the affairs in the mountains. And thank you so very much for listening to me patiently. And I'm open to questions. Yes.
May I ask something?
Please, sir. Yes.
I don't think you mentioned, the role of surface-to-air missiles in the region.
Yes. Yeah.
This is an important element, I think.
Absolutely. Yes, there are surface-to-air missiles. I mentioned about the shoulder-fired missiles because on hilltops, they have not only shoulder-fired missiles have been positioned, but in the valleys, in the plateau, in Ladakh, and in the northeast, the surface-to-air missiles are very much there. They are positioned. There are many other issues about radar cover in the mountains. There's another issue. So both radar cover and these surface-to-air missiles, they are very important. The radar cover can best be provided by the AVAX airborne platforms. Some are even thinking, the Chinese are thinking of having aerostats being positioned. Yes, these are
Any questions by audience?
If not, I have another question.
Yes, please go ahead.
What does happen to the pilots that are flying in these conditions? Do you see a greater attrition? Are their missions shorter because of the conditions that they have to operate in?
Professor Efraim, I must tell you, as far as the pilot is concerned, it doesn't, because whether you're flying in the plains or in the sea, or if you're flying at altitude, But I said, so there are no issues. Of course, the issue will be that if you have to eject into the mountains, you have to, you have to clothe yourself, you have to have your survival kit, to cater for the mountains. So there are those peculiarities you have to, handle. But otherwise, it's a purely sorties. I mentioned that valley for flying has got its own peculiarities. Attacking in valleys has got different things. If you remain very high altitude, like we had to do in Kargil, you are clear from the man portables, but you are not safe from, the other air defense weapons. So you have to do a mix and match. In Kargil, it was possible for us not to, worry about the altitude because you had to avoid the man pads. But because you were always in your own territory, but closer to the border with, in case of China, you have to worry about. So for a pilot, other than these issues related to the attack and on the ground, there are no other issues as far as flight is concerned.
Any questions from the attendees? Colonel Eran has some question.
Sir, you didn't mention interdiction of supply lines.
I did mention. See, within the 20 minutes time frame, I could not have got into details, but I did mention that supply lines, interdiction of bridges, communication lines is the highest dividend that you will get in this. because rebuilding bridges or roads is very difficult. To interdict a road, the best is to create a landslide by striking the side of the valley. Once the road gets covered, you slow down the motion. So interdiction is going to give a very, very high dividend. The army and the air forces. Sorry.
It's not a daily activity now vis-a-vis Pakistani supply lines to terrorists.
Yes, no, you see that interdiction. See, now we did this strike in Balakot because there was a terrorist camp, and that strike was, yeah, it was done because to take off a camp. Till now, we have done only 2 formal strikes. One, by the army, which went about 8-10 kilometers deep to take out the Pakistani terrorist camp, and one by the Air Force, which went deeper, 60 kilometers deep, and took off an entire training camp with 300, trainees, terrorist trainees. But otherwise, we are very, very closely monitoring all the launch pads across the line of control, where the Pakistani terrorists are, training primarily to prevent them from coming. But we have not taken offensive action on regular basis, unlike what Israel does, to knock off some of these launch pads, other than these 2-3 formal strikes that we did. Yeah.
Okay.
So if there are no questions, then Professor Efraim may sum up the session, please.
Okay, I'm very happy that we had this webinar together. I think it's very important for us to share experiences, to analyze maybe new ideas, how to fight. Both countries, unfortunately, have to use their military forces, particularly their air power, against their neighbors. We both live in a rough neighborhood, and I hope that the good relations between our 2 countries will continue, and particularly the close cooperation between the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security and the Delhi base Center for Air Power Studies, which I was privileged to visit. And we are welcome a delegation of yours to come here in Jerusalem. We are in the mountains. So
it's a fine.
Yeah, it's a hill. It's just 800 meters. It's not the Himalayas. We have to keep it in proportion, and we are humbled, of course, by the height of the Himalayas. So I just want to say shalom, hello from Jerusalem. And I hope we'll meet again in this and
soon.
Thank you, Professor. It was a pleasure interacting with you all. And I must tell you that we in India love Israelis. We love you people. And we have worked very, very closely for a few decades now. And we in Indian Air Force, from our AWC, from our UAVs, from our air defense systems, from our air defense radars, our missiles, our ISA radar from LCA aircraft, you name it. We are working very, very closely with Israel, and there is nobody else who is more so open and willing to share the hardware and the technologies as Israel is. And we continue to cherish this relationship, and we look forward to building on it. And that's what CAPS and JISS is trying to do. And we look forward to more interactions. Thank you very much, Colonel. It was a pleasure listening to you. You are not only an intelligence man, you are a very, very intelligent person. Very good.
Thank you. Well, we'll be happy to come again to India, the earliest opportunity.
Yes, yes. Okay. Okay.
All
Thank
the
you.
best.
And bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you
And
very